Oh,
just
you can
says,
look right
okay.
here. Okay. So today we have Regan, and she's going to explain some facts about wolves, real life facts, not misconceptions. And we are at the Wolf Conservation Center in North Salem?
South Salem.
South Salem, I was
Yeah.
close. Okay.
Do wolves kill for fun?
No, wolves don't. So there's one of the common misconceptions is that wolves kill for sport. So they kill way too much that they can actually eat, and then they just kind of leave it. And this has been disproved by several scientists, but there was a story a few years ago about 19 elk that were killed at a feedlot in Wyoming, and the media took it as wolves killing for sport because they said they slaughtered the 19 elk and just left them. But that's not true. Wolves don't kill for sport because they're so it's so challenging to find food. If they kill food, they're going to eat it. But sometimes there's that rare case where it might be really easy to kill two animals instead of one. So they're going to kill both and assume they can just eat the other animal when the time comes. They'll kind of save it for when they're not able to find more food. But in the case of the 19 elk out in Wyoming, if you're looking at photos or the media coverage of it, you'll notice all of the carcasses are surrounded by people, and there's tire tracks around them, and that kind of prevents wolves from coming back because they're so afraid of people. They're not going to approach the carcasses. So it did look like they killed them for sport because they killed them, but then as they're trying to come back, there's all these people surrounding them. It smells like people, and they're not going to come back anymore. So they ended up leaving them, and that was seized by a lot of people as wolves killing for sport, but they really don't. They kill just what they can to survive, and then they'll move on. But if the chance does come that they can kill a few more, they will, but that's very rare and very common.
Okay. We know that the term for the leader of the pack is it's called the alpha.
Mm-hmm.
What's the term used for the one that's the lesser in the pack?
Sure. So wolves are living in family groups very similar to people. So there's the alpha pair, and those are going to be the parents. There's actually a movement to start calling them the breeding pair rather than the alpha pair because pack dynamics can be very fluid and changing constantly, based on family size, number of wolves in the pack as they're coming and going. But generally speaking, in terms of the hierarchy of wolves, the lowest ranking would be the omega. And it doesn't have to be the youngest wolf. For example, we had a family of red wolves where it was a mom, a dad, 3 older siblings, and then 5 puppies. And one of the older siblings was considered to be the omega. And she was the one that would be picked on. But they actually play a very important role in kind of decreasing the stress of the family. And so everyone can kind of, play with them, but they are also kind of the brunt of some of the jokes. But that particular female was actually also the babysitter. So even though she was considered to be the lowest in rank, she was actually given one of the most important roles in terms of watching the puppies when mom and dad left. And the other siblings weren't tasked with that. That was all her.
We know wolves are pack hunters. Would you say that relatively they're good at hunting?
Wolves are built to hunt, so they're built to be able to run relatively similar to their prey that they're chasing. But hunting is very challenging. So wolves maybe weigh about 60 to 120 pounds, and some of the animals they're chasing, like bison or elk, they can be 7 to 8 times, 10 times their size. And so already it's very challenging to get your prey. But the animals they're chasing are also much stronger than they are, and wolves have been known to be trampled by bison or by elk as they're trying to hunt them. They've been stabbed by antlers. They have been kicked. Sometimes they kick them so hard they shatter a rib, they shatter a skull. But scientists have actually found that if wolves go hunting 6 days in a row, they're probably only going to catch something 1 out of those 6 days. So on average, they end up eating roughly once a week. And so when they do eat, they're actually considered to be feast or famine eaters. So they eat as much as they can at once because they don't know when their next meal will be. So they'll gorge themselves, and they might eat up to 22, 24 pounds at once, depending on what it is that they killed. But no, not the best at hunting. Based on what people think, people assume that they're able to kill anything they want. And so when they do hunt, usually it's going after animals that are easier to catch. So still an elk or a bison, but maybe a baby, maybe one that's been injured or is a bit older and isn't able to move as quickly.
Okay. Well, you kind of answered the next question with that answer, but in their natural ecosystem, what could you kind of list the kind of animals that they would typically hunt or what they would eat?
Yeah, so it depends on where they're living. So gray wolves in North America live as far south as Mexico and as far north as the Arctic, and then a lot of different places in between. So if they're up in the Arctic, they might be going after muskox. So still ungulates, but very large. Maybe going after smaller mammals, Arctic hares, caribou. And then as you're getting, further south into the lower 48 states, it's going to be elk, moose, bison, deer. Mexican wolves actually will hunt, deer and elk, but also javelinas, they're wild pigs. Red wolves, where they're living in North Carolina, will hunt white-tailed deer, but also smaller rodents. But they've actually been known to kill nutria, which is an invasive rodent in the southeast, and it's a problem for a lot of farmers because it eats their crops. And red wolves actually are one of the only animals that will actually prey on it and eat that.
Okay. Are wolves very territorial when it comes to the area where they live?
Yeah, so wolves will occupy a territory, and that kind of belongs to them, and they'll actually mark it. So they'll scent mark along the edge, so they'll urinate as a way of telling other wolves kind of what belongs to them. And usually it's pretty effective. If other wolves smell that, they know if they're crossing into another wolf's territory. They might choose not to cross into it, or they might choose to cross in knowing that there could be a confrontation. But their territories can be over 1,000 square miles in size in the wild, and they are going to be pretty protective of that because that area encompasses their food sources, water sources, also their den, and so it is important to protect it.
What would you say is one major misconception people might have of wolves?
Just that wolves are dangerous and that they might eat them. Any wild animal is dangerous. It's important to remember that. Just because wolves aren't going to attack you doesn't mean you should walk up to one if you see one in the wild. But they're not going to go out of their way to follow you. So if you do see a wolf in the wild, it's going to run in the other direction. It's not going to approach you. And that's something we always try to express to people during our programs, is that you don't really have anything to fear from wolves, but it is important to know how they act and how they behave, because if you're going out into the wild and you're not quite sure how to act around an animal, that might do more harm than good, but it would be your fault, not theirs, because you're not maybe best equipped to be in the wild around those animals.
We know that wolves communicate by howling. How many different types of howls do they have?
Wolves actually howl in over 21 different dialects. So different howls are obviously meant for different things, and scientists have actually found that different types of wolves use different sounds to communicate different things. So we like to compare it to, some people might say soda versus pop, and it means the exact same thing. Different types of wolves can use different howls, but they would essentially mean the exact same thing. But scientists haven't yet been able to figure out exactly what a howl means. Obviously, it's very challenging. But we know that there are certain howls that mean alarm calls, or they're stressed. And so we're able to kind of figure out if we hear that, maybe we should reassess what we're doing or go check the situation. But as long as they're just howling and it's their normal howl, we don't know what they're saying, but we assume everything's okay, and we don't really act.
And you've mentioned that each wolf has its own voice in a sense?
Yep, so each wolf has their own unique howl, very similar to how people have different voices when they speak. So all of the wolves that we have here, our center's home to 50, and we have 4 ambassador wolves. They've been hand-raised, and they each have their own unique howl. We actually know which wolf is howling if we're down in our office or we're not actually looking at them. We can tell which wolf is howling. And the same goes for our red wolves and our Mexican gray wolves. We might not be able to as clearly identify it's that particular red wolf in the family, especially if they're young and they've just kind of started howling, but we can at least pinpoint it's a red wolf from this group or from this group, with our Mexican wolves as well. But then as we start to hear them howl very often, we are able to figure out which one is howling. So we have a family of 6 red wolves, and the male and female, the breeding pair, they each have their own very unique howls. And as someone who's just heard them howl for the very first time, they might sound exactly the same. But if you listen over time, you'll kind of figure out the female has a much more kind of rapid-fire yappy howl, and the male will do kind of a quick, almost like a bark in the beginning of his howl, and then it kind of just soars into a regular howl. And so it's interesting to kind of pinpoint those and figure out where they're different as the weeks and months go by.
Okay. Within the family structure or the pack itself, what do they do? Say, for instance, a pup passes away.
So it depends. So pups passing away, it's not common, but it's not uncommon either. There's about a 50% chance that pups don't make it to their first birthday. So it is very challenging those first few months, even the first year, to just make it to be big enough and strong enough that you're not going to be taken down by another animal or just by other risk factors. But if a female maybe gives birth to a pup that's stillborn, or it passes away very quickly after birth, there's a pretty good chance she's going to eat it, and it's a great way to get some extra nutrients. In the wild, wolves might not know when their next meal is going to come, so they want to be able to eat everything they can. And especially a mom who's nursing and trying to feed the other pups, it is important that she stays very strong. So she might eat those. We have seen that happen at our center, but also at other facilities in the wild as well. It has been documented. If the pup's a bit older, maybe a few months old, there's no kind of rule for what they're going to do. It kind of depends on each wolf. Um, they might just leave it and kind of move on. We had a case where one of our pups passed away a few years ago, and it turns out they had buried it. It was covered in dirt when we found it, so they must have kind of tucked it away somewhere in their enclosure. But it really just depends on the individual wolf and how they choose to deal with the situation.
What are some of the best questions you've received about wolves, or one that you can think of, just one of the best?
We have some people that ask, especially with a lot of current events right now, the impact wolves have on livestock and cattle out west, because they are sharing the landscape. Wolves are not living on the northeast except for in North Carolina, so they're primarily out west, and they are coming into contact with livestock and ranches. And many people kind of have this idea that wolves are like the leading cause of death for livestock, and they're actually not. The U.S. Department of Agriculture did a study in 2010, and so it's a bit dated, but the data still holds. And they found that out of the millions of cattle deaths each year, wolves are only responsible for 0.2% of them. The leading cause is respiratory problems, but you're actually also more likely to lose a cow to theft or to domestic dogs, even to vultures, than you are to wolves. And people use the wolves killing the livestock as justification for attacking wolves and killing them. And they think that by killing wolves, they're actually going to stop their livestock attacks, because they figure take out the problem animal and it should stop. But science actually has found that killing a wolf that's attacking livestock, or killing multiple wolves that are attacking livestock, actually leads to an increase in livestock attacks, because the family that's left actually kind of fragments. Because if you're killing a wolf, you're usually killing one of the leaders, one of the biggest ones, and in doing so, you might be leaving behind younger wolves that haven't yet learned how to effectively hunt elk or larger animals, and so they're going to go after the easiest things to catch, which are going to be livestock. And so you just see it returning again and again. Washington State, just yesterday, they killed the alpha male of the Togo pack. So it was a family of wolves that was living in the northeast kind of corner of Washington. And they had been attacking livestock. And so a few weeks ago, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife officials issued a kill permit. So they were going to allow wildlife officials for the state to kill the alpha male of the group. He was wearing a radio collar. And they were going to kill him using the justification that killing him would stop livestock attacks. And then there was a halt was placed in the kill order and injunction, because a few groups brought the issue to court, saying they didn't do an environmental impact assessment and there wasn't enough work done to actually justify using the kill order. And a judge kind of dismissed that on Friday, and they killed the wolf yesterday morning. But even in court, as Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife officials were arguing for why the kill order should continue, they even said, we know that killing the alpha male will leave behind just the alpha female and her pups. It's going to be very hard for her to find enough food. She's probably going to turn to livestock in order to supplement what she's not getting. So they're even aware of the fact that killing wolves just leads to an increase in livestock attacks. It doesn't actually stop it. But oftentimes it's just done to appease the local community or ranchers, because they're saying that these wolves keep attacking our livestock and you need to do something about it. But the more effective ways of kind of controlling wolves and livestock are just using non-lethal methods. So using ways to prevent wolves from coming into your ranch or coming near your cattle, but without killing them. So having a human presence. Range riders are gaining in popularity. It's usually someone on horseback or an ATV, and they're monitoring the property, looking for predators, signs of predators, looking for carcasses. In many states, there's no law saying you actually have to remove a dead cow carcass within a certain amount of time, so it usually is just left in the landscape. And wolves usually might scavenge off of that because it's free food, and if that happens often enough, eventually they're going to think that's what they should be eating, so it could lead to an increase in livestock attacks as well. So just removing carcasses is also a great way to start. There are also livestock guardian dogs, so dogs that will patrol the property, and they'll chase predators away, they'll bark, and prove to be very, very loud. So there are a lot of things people can do to keep wolves away from livestock, but killing wolves really isn't the answer. It actually just causes more problems rather than solving any.
Okay. You spoke a lot about, the laws and things having to do with wolves. Is it legal to have a wolf as a pet
It
in any
depends on the
state?
state.
Any state?
So there are some states that do allow wolves to be kept. Some states need to have a permit to say you're using it for an educational purpose. Some states also allow for wolf-dog hybrids to be kept as pets. So wolves, dogs, and coyotes are all so closely related that they can all interbreed and produce viable offspring, so their offspring can then reproduce as well. And New York State does not allow for either a wolf or a wolf hybrid to be kept as pets. We don't encourage it. Even if a state were to allow it, it's not a good idea. Hybrids are not good pets. Wolves are not good pets because wolves are completely wild, and hybrids do have a part of them that is wild. So it's best to let wolves stay wild, or to have a facility care for them that is actually best equipped to do so.
Aside from all the great information you just provided, is there anything else that you would like to just say to have people be more aware?
I think it's important for people to use their voices to save wolves, because many people like wolves, but they might not do anything about it. They might just say they like them and it's their favorite animal. And that's great. It's always great to have people supporting wolves in that way, but you can actually do so much more for them just by speaking up. So something we would suggest is actually just contacting your representative in Congress and asking them to support wolves, because unfortunately many protections for wolves are now based on legislation, and they're not really based on science anymore. So the Federal Endangered Species Act was created in the 1970s, and it does protect wolves, but in some states they've been delisted, so they're no longer protected under that federal level, so it comes up to the states to manage them. And many states have instated hunting seasons, and some states want to bring hunting seasons back. And there is a bill, the Interior Appropriations Bill. It's passed a version in the House, and they passed a version in the Senate, and they're very similar except for a few riders. But there's one rider that says that calls for delisting wolves or removing them from the endangered species list in the lower 48 states. And so that would allow certain states to bring back hunting seasons, because they could manage wolves as they see fit at a state level, as long as Fish and Wildlife can conclude that they aren't totally destroying them. They are, trying to manage them on some level. And there's no reason to kill wolves. It's trophy hunting, because they do attack livestock, but killing them doesn't stop livestock attacks. They're not competing with us for the same food sources, because they're going after animals that are easier to catch, weak, injured, and people aren't usually hunting those animals. They don't pose a threat to humans. There's only about 2 recorded cases of a wolf attacking and killing a human in North America, the lower 48 states. So they don't really pose any threats. So it kind of just shows that the only reason people want to kill them, after all the science is kind of laid out, is just because they want to kill them. And there's no need to have that. So we always encourage people to spread the word about wolves, but also use their voices, because that is extremely powerful, and it usually works. They always try to get wolves delisted every single year through Congress, and we haven't had it happen yet. So there were a few years ago where wolves were delisted in certain states, and then protections were reinstated because their recovery plans or their management plans weren't considered to be robust enough to support the wolves that were there. And so that's why Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota have wolves protected now, because they were kind of taken away from them when they rolled out their first potential plans, and they weren't considered to be safe enough or supportive enough for wolves in those areas.
And you have web cameras?
Yes, so you'll see that's a webcam on this tree, and it's looking right now at Atka, who's one of our ambassador wolves. But we have cameras inside almost all of our enclosures. So we have 10 enclosures here, 9 of them have cameras. Several have multiple cameras, so a camera inside a den, and a camera on the exterior fence line. And they're visible to the public, accessible through our website, and it's a great way to watch our wolves from home, because they don't know you're watching. So you see much more natural behaviors, movements. We've had puppies born in front of the cameras. We've had puppies grow up in front of the camera, so they're playing, they're wrestling. We've seen wolves catch things in front of the cameras as well, so kill some animals in their enclosures. So it is a great way to see a whole other aspect of conservation, but also just wolf behavior and wolf communication than you would see if you were here in person.
And what is the website?
The website is nywolf.org, and if you just Google Wolf Conservation Center, it pops up too.
Okay, and you had mentioned yesterday that you did release a captive wolf into the wild, and it did successfully make a kill.
Yes. So we've released 3 of our Mexican wolves into the wild as part of our participation in the Mexican Wolf Recovery Program. And the first wolf we released, her name was F838, and she was released in 2006. And there's a lot of concern from certain individuals about releasing wolves from captivity into the wild. They say maybe they're not able to effectively catch and kill animals because they've grown up in captivity and haven't been really exposed to live prey. And she disproved that very quickly. About 3 weeks roughly after she was released into the wild, she was actually picked up on a trail camera, so a camera that's mounted on a tree or anything in the wild, and it picks up motion in front of it. And she and her family were spotted eating an elk carcass that they'd killed. So it was a sign that she doesn't need to grow up in the wild to learn how to kill. But 3 months after she was released into the wild, she was killed by a poacher.
Well, thank you so much for your time. If you could just give us a demonstration of the howling,
Oh.
because you said that they know your voice.
Okay.